2019 study that we conducted found that 40 of Colorado's 64 counties had voter registration rates exceeding 100% of the eligible citizen voting age population. The share of counties with registration rates exceeding 100% was the highest in the nation. So what does that mean? They have more voters on the rolls than there are people who are living there and eligible to vote. It's a pretty good indication they're not taking the steps necessary, don't you think, to clean up the rolls? Well, that's what we thought. We had a major court ruling by a federal court in Colorado in a lawsuit that we had brought against Colorado officials over the dirty voting lists in Colorado. The National Voter Registration Act requires states to take reasonable steps to clean up the rolls. And what we do, and we've done, is use the law to sue the states who aren't cleaning up the rolls. It's never been done in American history till Judicial Watch did it, to have private entities go in and enforce this federal law, because the leftists at the Justice Department didn't want to do it. They don't want clean election rolls. And I don't need to tell you why. So Judicial Watch did it first in Ohio and in Indiana. We settled a lawsuit in California that's led to an ongoing cleanup of up to 1.6 million names from the rolls. There's a consent decree in Kentucky that could lead, I think, to 500,000 names being cleaned up. But there were other states with dirty voting rolls. Pennsylvania, North Carolina, I think between the two of them, they had 2 million extra names on the rolls, names that probably shouldn't be there. We sued those states in federal court, but that litigation's ongoing. In Colorado's a mess. I mean, look at this, the stats there. I mean, you're just not going to believe it. I don't even know how they can conduct fair and honest elections with these numbers. 2019 study that we conducted found that 40 of Colorado's 64 counties had voter registration rates exceeding 100% of the eligible citizen voting age population. The share of counties with registration rates exceeding 100% was the highest in the nation. So what does that mean? They have more voters on the rolls than there are people who are living there and eligible to vote. It's a pretty good indication they're not taking the steps necessary, don't you think, to clean up the rolls? Well, that's what we thought. Data that Colorado itself provided to the Election Assistance Commission, which is a federal agency, showed that Colorado was lagging in the processing and removal of certain classes of ineligible registrations belonging to those who had moved out of state. So meaning people moved and they were still on the rolls. In the last 2 years, 60 of California's 64 counties had a higher percentage of inactive registrations than the national median. So if the national median is here, Colorado's here. And inactive registrations are people who haven't participated in elections in years, who under federal law should be subject to removal, and it's not being done. And for instance, in 8 Colorado counties, more than 1 in 6 registrants were inactive. The lists are filthy. So Colorado came in and tried to shut our lawsuit down because we sued to clean up the rolls. I mean, and by the way, it doesn't mean rolls in the rest of the country are dirty, but these are kind of outliers that if we can't get these states to clean up the rolls, then we can never really deal with the states that have lesser problems, although significant if you're a voter in that state in terms of clean elections. So they tried to shut our case down. Of course, by the way, we're being challenged across the land by leftist organizations. So when we go into court, it's not just against the states or counties, government officials. We have the left trying to intervene, sometimes successfully, to try to thwart our litigation. So yeah, it's kind of like Judicial Watch versus George Soros in some of these cases, practically speaking. So we filed this lawsuit back in 2020 to clean up Colorado's rolls. We filed it on our behalf and on the behalf of member residents of Colorado, people who support Judicial Watch, who are also voters out there. And the court said our case can proceed. Now, those of you who are not lawyers, and I'll warn you, I'm not a lawyer, so take my description of the court process for what it's worth. You file a lawsuit, right? And and this is typically federal litigation, the government has a period of time to respond. Now, they can respond with either an answer, and an answer means the case just goes forward. They're answering the complaint, they're going to defend it in court, or a motion to dismiss, or sometimes a motion for summary judgment, both of which would essentially end the case. So we survived, and they rejected the Colorado's motions to dismiss the court. And in his court, the chief district court judge out there, Philip Rimmer, ruled that Judicial Watch's allegations about Colorado's voting lists were enough to allow the lawsuit to proceed. Judicial Watch claims the Secretary of State of Colorado, is not complying with the MVRA, the National Voter Registration Act. It's based on public records and statistical analysis. We insist that they've shown not only high registration rates, which they claim courts have found indicative of MVRA violation, but also that the Secretary sends too few confirmation notices and has too high a number of inactive voters on the rolls. The court finds that the plaintiffs have met their burden and have plausibly alleged Colorado's list maintenance program does not comply with the MVRA. Now, he's not saying they were right. They're saying we have a case that's substantial enough that it should proceed, and we should get discovery on it, practically speaking. And so, and I'm going to explain what they mean by confirmation notices, and this is what's so frustrating about this. Essentially, if you're not voting, you should get a confirmation notice from your jurisdiction, your state or the county, whatever, saying, hey, are you still there? You didn't vote. And if you don't respond or otherwise don't vote for 2 federal general elections, meaning 4+ years, they are, I think, under the law, the way the law has been interpreted, required to remove your name. But in California, they hadn't done that in 20 years. And evidently in Colorado, they're not doing their job either. So this is sort of basic list maintenance, minimal list maintenance that Colorado evidently wasn't doing. And the court further ruled that the individual plaintiffs, Judicial Watch and Company, have standing to sue based on the fact that the non-compliance with the MVRA undermines the individual plaintiff's confidence in the integrity of the election process and discourages their participation in elections. That's a major ruling. That's a major ruling. And it not only, in my view, applies to our efforts to clean up the rolls, but potentially other issues related to clean elections in terms of having standing to pursue this. So this is just great. This case is going to go forward, and I think it's going to result in Colorado cleaning up its rolls. Maybe not as much as we like, but more than they would have without the federal lawsuit. And the Justice Department is going to do this. Justice Department is harassing states who are trying to increase voter security. Even if the voting rules are actually been expanded past where I would have, and where they were expanded past where they were prior to 2020, the leftists in the Justice Department are targeting states like Georgia, and they're going to go after Texas. Texas is about to pass their voter security laws again. They're going to pass them, and they'll probably be signed over the next few weeks. Justice Department's going to go after them over that. So Judicial Watch is in court trying to make sure the elections are cleaner, either next year or in 2024 or 2026. I mean, this is a long ball game, folks. And it may be frustratingly slow, but nothing is being done otherwise. Nothing. And remember, people who would challenge the 2020 elections, the courts went after. This is radioactive for some courts, but Judicial Watch, we did this, and we're still in court. And as we highlighted, as I highlighted, Bob Popper and Russ Nobile, who are 2 of our attorneys. Bob runs our election law team. we were testifying to Congress 4 or 5 times over the left's attempts to hijack our elections on a national basis through congressional legislation. So we're the lead here. We are the lead. Now, we're obviously investigating what went on in 2022, so we haven't forgotten about that. But we just have to. We're just keeping on. Just trying to get these laws filed. These lawsuits filed and pursued, so that your rolls are cleaner. And it's now more important than ever, because outrageously we are relying on these voter registration lists, which are notoriously dirty, to mass mail these ballots. This is why I object to what actually Georgia was doing, because they made it more likely for people to use mail-in ballots. And I don't think the security measures are make up for the lack of security for people dropping things in the mail rather than voting in person. Same in Texas. So you should watch that as your states go through election reform issues. Why are they codifying vote by mail? But I guess I'm getting distracted. But the point is, we're in the litigation. People are voting by mail in increasing numbers. I think it's a terrible practice. But in the least, we need to make sure the rolls are cleaner. No one else is doing it but Judicial Watch, at least at the federal level. So it's great news. As I said in our release, dirty voting rolls can mean dirty elections. And you have a right, and certainly the citizens of Colorado specifically have a right to expect that the state's voting rolls, your state's voting rolls, are reasonably kept up to date. We're not asking for perfection. It's a mailing list. It's never going to be perfect. The federal law requires you take reasonable steps to clean up the rolls. And individually, you can ask your county and your state what they're doing to clean up the rolls. You have a right to ask under federal law, and they're supposed to respond to you. So look on our website for more information on how to do that, and ask them directly, what are you doing to clean up the rolls? So there you go. And of course, support Judicial Watch's work.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch all the latest news from Judicial Watch.